The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 3. The Small Man. Chapter 5. The Vulgarization of Disgust. The critical dissatisfaction of the scientific and philosophic mind where human capacity is concerned is not novel. Vulgarization is the novelty. Another novelty is the vulgarity of the governing mercantile class, side by side with the extraordinary intellectual resources of the intellectual. The effect of the vulgarization on the ruler is at least as significant as its effect on the man in the street. Philosophers or men of science, witnessing the popular miscarriage of their thought, are disgusted or resigned, as the case may be. The democratic ruler, who alone is responsible for the worst and most calamitous miscarriages, associates himself with them, and in chorus they all abuse the poor plain man. What has happened is that disgust has been vulgarized. This is more deadly in its effects than the vulgarization of knowledge. The natural insolence and desire for a feeling of superiority of those who are superior in nothing but money and the power it gives, is thus provided. And the noble pessimism of the speculative mind is at once translated into acts, and employed as a sanction for exploitation. The whole of this new system of governmental metaphysic can be best defined as the philosophy of what the public wants. The form that government in the Western democratic countries takes being publicity, suggestion, persuasion, and education, the full significance for the community of this cynical dogma cannot be exaggerated. I will attempt to formulate more explicitly than one of its adepts would be able to do, or would care to do, probably, the principle of the dogma of what the public wants. Its similarity to the philosopher's cry of despair from which it derives will in this way be brought out. Let us imagine, then, an adept of this dogma summarizing his principles for the benefit of some budding publicist. In the candor of the confessional, heart to heart with a secure postulant, they would run as follows. Take the poorest and most abject cretin in the community, 80%. Of which resemble him very nearly. Say to yourself, there is nothing too simple and inhumanly stupid, the sort of thing that gives you that empty feeling in the pit of the stomach, for this low-grade fool. It would take you 500 centuries to teach him to frame the simplest abstract notion. He is permanently and forever an infant. The infant's class always absorbs 80%. Of the personnel of our famous terrestrial training school, or technical institute, which we call mankind.
The eternal alphabet A, B, C, D is the music that, in one form or another, would greet a visitor from another planet come to see how we were getting on. This repartition of the fairies' gifts, leaving this vast human surplus practically cretinesque, you must accept. It is not your doing, you did not make the world. You can do nothing to modify it, and even if you could, are you sure that you would not be going against Providence? There is a possibility that a wisdom superior to yours arranged things in this way. Abandon, therefore, all those queer attempts to educate this dense throng of inappertiva mankind, or rather, canalize your educative efforts in such a way that only the simplest instruction is provided, nothing that will tax those truly infantile intelligences. For they are as truly infantile as what more technically is an infant. And the same rule not to overtax and overstrain this undeveloped brain applies to them as to the child. So, A, B, C, D, 2 and 2 make 4, donkey tap the door. 3 and 3 make 6, lamps, not tramps, have wicks. Compare the American Army tests of Yerkes and others. Whatever you consider it possible or desirable to impart to them, let it be on that system. From these ineluctable premises and observations, as you will see, a vast system of government ensues. Although we have called this prodigious mass of people infantile, they of course outwardly grow up. They do not call themselves infantile as a community. They claim to be treated as responsible, accomplished, intelligent beings. They want to have official bulletins every morning of all the accidents, fires, murders, rapes that have occurred throughout the night and part of the preceding day. They wish a detailed account of how their agents and ministers of state have fulfilled their trust, as they call it, in the conduct of that great and sacred affair, the Commonwealth. And they wish to be informed punctually of the results of all racing, ball games, paper chases, bullfights, and other similar events. The what the public wants method of meeting these demands is the best and only one, see our advert. It is run on the lines outlined above. Something in the form of the enthralling adventures of Bo Peep and Patsy is essential to wreathe all their rosy faces and happy smiles. Then a hush will come at the sight of a heading, war cloud in the east or war cloud in the west. Father will frown, exclaiming, I say. Things look serious. Then the infants class will be led into the deepest and dirtiest secrets of the underworld of Westminster in a column of the most wildly indiscreet gossip. It is an open secret, among those in the know, it is freely whispered in the lobbies and closets of the talking house,
that Mr. Chamberlain will shortly make an announcement that will surprise 3 of his colleagues and most intimate cronies very much indeed, unless, as may of course happen, it comes to their ears, for there is always the chance that they may get wind of it. Mr. Citizen looks very knowing at this. He has indeed got his penneth. The same great principles laid down above apply to the cinema, wireless, and theatre. Unless you wish to give yourself quite unnecessary trouble, involve yourself in a considerable money loss, and become very unpopular, in these occupations, as in everything else, you must follow the golden rule, namely, you cannot aim too low. The story you present cannot be too stupid. It is not only impossible to exaggerate, it in itself requires a trained publicist to form any idea of the idiocy of the public. In general, it can be said that no confidence trick is too transparent to dupe them with, no picture of life is too unreal or sugary for their taste, no mental effort is too slight not to arouse an immediate and indignant protest from them. That, I suppose, would be the main statement. But associated with the stupidity of the public is also its malignity. Cf. Richet's stupidity and ferocity are even made for each other. When you have a lot of one, you cannot have too much of the other. There is a further point. This credo can be imagined as proceeding. This great mass with which you have to live and deal as best you can is not either reliable, truthful, possessed of the slightest magnanimity or kindness, or any of the things that would make it easy to get on with. However much you trick it, it will not fall short of you in cunning, but only in ability. You will never trick it as much as it would like to trick you. Cf. Because this is to be asserted in general of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowards, covetous, and as long as you succeed they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, children, as is said above. Friendships that are obtained by payment, and not by greatness are not secured, etc., etc. Machiavelli. So, ethically, even, your adherence to the doctrine of what the public wants is justified by the mechanisate of human nature, just as intellectually you are forced to the procedures laid down in that doctrine by human stupidity. The most bitter philosopher, Machiavelli, just quoted, as an example, would not speak very differently to this. But the doctrine of what the public wants begins where philosophy leaves off. And in the case of this belief it is not so much the truth of what it states, as of the uses to which this discovery is put, and the spirit in which it is held. Nothing useful to the world was ever accomplished as a result of such a belief steadily held, nothing at least but a work of hatred, which has its creative uses, no doubt, as Jaurès thought. What on the analogy of the dyer's hand it usually produces, except for the moments during which it is engaged in epic destruction, is something inconceivably common and barren. Professor Richet, or the author of The Anatomy of Melancholy, one a man of science and the other a divine, would thus agree with a great prophet of what the public wants to a large extent in their estimate of the public. But they would act quite differently on this information. The latter would rub his hands with satisfaction, and approach the public with an obsequious grin, and a "What can I do for you today, my little man?" Professor Richet, his face convulsed with angry discouragement, would rush out and apostrophize his semblable, his frere. Hideous and undesirable as is the caricature of the private thoughts of the philosopher contained in what the public wants theory, yet the pessimistic original cannot be neglected. If the creative minds of the world are indeed forever cancelled and rendered ineffective by the agency of the unprogressive mass of men, then they should be protected and rescued. This is of more importance than the gratification of the vanity of the human average. The human average would get more out of such a salvage than out of those satisfactions for which it pays the expert of what the public wants so dearly. Left at the mercy of this vast average, its inertia, creative hatred, and conspiratorial habits where the new is concerned, we shall always checkmate ourselves. The more we advance, the more we shall lose ground. In the ultimate interest of all of us we should sacrifice anything to the end that this most priceless power of any, the intellectual power by which, as a kind, we express and illustrate ourselves, precisely because of which we are conscious of our poor organization and the fatuity of our record up to date, be put in a position finally to be effective. Instead of the vast organization to exploit the weaknesses of the many, should we not possess one for the exploitation of the intelligence of the few? Does the public really want what the public wants? In a sense, no doubt, it does. But it would not want to be flattered on such a gigantic scale if it knew what this flattery cost it. Again, what the public wants, as it is practiced today, must lead its practitioner into lunacy or some form of imbecility, or else, with the stronger-minded and more cynical, into a mood of hatred where their millions of little charges are concerned. Hatred of stupidity must result, where it is not succumbed to, in those whose business it is to be incessantly isolating and exploiting it. But a great specialist in stupidity, like one of the great original newspaper kings, could only become what he does thanks to the clairvoyance of hatred of some sort. The great journalist and publicity figures with which everybody is familiar probably started with an intense irritation and dislike of the stupidity out of which subsequently they made their great fortunes. What started in hatred and contempt, passing to mastery and fortune, has been seen sometimes to end in madness. Hatred of stupidity is a most dangerous thing to encourage in yourself or others. It must have as a policy, or widely indulged in practice, the most diabolical results. Then, again, to hate stupidity is really to hate failure, for stupidity is that. And although the Christian attitude on this point does not of necessity recommend itself, it is better than what we are familiar with under the form of the worship of success. But to love stupidity would be even worse, no doubt. Self-sacrifice in the interest of the lame, the halt, and the blind is the extreme theoretic, Christian, form of that. It cannot be said to have succeeded. In that sense it has practiced what it preached. An entirely different attitude either from that of Christianity or from what the public wants, towards the majority of mankind, having no trace of disgust or dislike, hatred or impossible unreal love, seems to suggest itself as necessary for the new ruler of the world. It is no doubt as unkind and as great a waste of time to give the public what it doesn't want, in the way of art, literature, or science, as it is to degrade it below what it does actually want in order to make more money out of it. If you must treat the public as animals in a vast zoo, you should at least observe the usual rule for such places, namely, do not irritate the animals. Why not be satisfied with the public as it is, and let it amuse itself as it pleases? If you yourself have other ideas of amusement, then it is always open to you to turn from that humdrum human fare and occupy yourself in some other way without offending anybody.